Alright, so Tony Ferguson just got submitted by Michael Chiesa in the first round of their fight in Abu Dhabi, and instead of capping off his record-breaking 8-fight losing streak by ceremoniously retiring in the cage, Tony instead chose to edge all of us into some weird half-retirement where he only left one of his gloves in the octagon. And to be honest with you, I feel like this is a very on-brand move for Tony because no other fighter is so deeply strange enough to even think of doing something so inexplicably odd. Because even though he left one singular glove in the octagon, Tony not only didn't retire, he even said himself that he doesn't want to retire and that he wants to fight for the UFC. So yeah, the way I see it, Tony can leave one glove in the octagon or 50, but it's clear to me that if it were completely up to him, he would keep on fighting, and yeah, that's pretty concerning to me. But to be fair to the guy, I wouldn't say that he looked all that bad last night. Like, yes, he lost the fight, but I feel like Tony was actually winning over Chiesa up until the finishing sequence. And sure, they only fought for like 4 minutes or whatever, but at least Tony kind of looked decent as opposed to getting dominated before being choked out. But the thing is, now that this is Tony's 8th consecutive loss in a row, this officially becomes the longest losing streak in the history of the UFC. The fact that Tony went on a legendary 12-fight win streak that's turned into a record-setting 8-fight losing streak is really only something that could happen to a guy like him. And despite the fact that most guys would have called it quits after their 4th or 5th loss in a row, Tony's just built differently than the rest, it seems. Because I really do get the feeling that Tony is going to circle back in a couple of weeks to ask Dana White and Hunter Campbell for another fight, and I'm worried that they're going to give him an opportunity to turn this into a 9-fight losing streak. I mean, if you don't believe me, just look at Tony's post-fight press conference from yesterday where he says that he wants to keep on fighting.
Look, we know what Dana said, right? And at the end of the day, he's the one who gets to call those shots. If the UFC say to you, I'm sorry, Tony, no more, what do you do? Do you consider competing for other people? Do you call it a day on that, or what do you do?
I talked to my homeboy Lloyd right there, and what we do is we go do something else. And I'm going to be real, if those fans out there are willing enough to come out here and fly and spend thousands of dollars to come watch me compete somewhere, I guarantee you they're going to follow me somewhere.
Yeah, so it doesn't really seem like Tony wants to leave the UFC, and not only that, the guy literally said that if he did get cut, then he would simply just find a new place to fight. So even if Dana and Hunter cut Tony, then that doesn't really solve this whole problem of Tony not being able to say that it's over. In fact, it might even just make things worse because wherever Tony might end up could be in a sport or a promotion that will let him get beat up as many times as he wants. And call me crazy, but I really don't think that Tony's at a point in his life where he should be taking on additional brain damage. And while we're on the topic of brain damage, Tony's responses at the post-fight press conference were kind of all over the place. It's strange because even though Tony speaks clearly and it's not like he's slurring his words or anything, I feel like a lot of his responses weren't really coherent. Like sometimes he didn't directly answer the questions that he was asked, and it seemed like he had a hard time staying on topic with his responses because he kept on rambling on about stuff that didn't seem all that relevant. It honestly reminds me of when you talk to like your grandpa or just any other old guy and they say so much yet so little has anything to do with what you're actually talking about. And I know that you're gonna say that Tony has always had weird interviews where he says strange things, which is true, but I don't know if it's ever been quite this bad before. And I don't know if I'm being too overly critical here, but Tony seriously just keeps rambling on and on about stuff throughout this interview, and yeah, it just feels a little bit concerning to me. So if it's not painfully obvious how I feel about all of this, then I will just say that I definitely think it's time for Tony to retire from combat sports competition altogether. Like, don't go to the PFL, don't do BKFC, don't even do karate combat because he's going to get beat up if he goes down any of those avenues. I mean, maybe he can compete in grappling matches, but even there he can still experience unnecessary head trauma that he really doesn't need any more of at this point. I've also seen people online say that Tony should pursue a career in coaching, and even though I have my doubts on how good of a trainer and cornerman Tony would actually be, I definitely think that it's a better path to take than continuing to get beat up in the ring. You know, it's become a bit of a tradition for me whenever Tony loses these days to remind myself that Tony unnecessarily did a full weight cut for a fight that was cancelled, only to do another full weight cut just 2 weeks later heading into an actual fight against Justin Gaethje where we all know that he took life-changing amounts of punishment in that fight. Personally, I can't help but feel like Tony's weird ego-driven decision to do that first unnecessary weight cut was ultimately his undoing. Because maybe if Tony didn't do 2 full weight cuts in 3 weeks before fighting Justin Gaethje, then maybe he wouldn't have gotten pulverized as badly as he did. And maybe if he took less damage in that Justin fight, then maybe that could have changed how he performed in all of his fights since. But who knows, it's really just woulda coulda shoulda at this point, but I really feel like that double weight cut for no reason was Tony's real undoing in his career. Anyways, let's see what the internet has to say about all of this. This guy says the most Tony Ferguson thing ever. He's retired, kind of retired, and then unretired within the same hour. And honestly, I can't help but agree, because only someone as crazy as Tony could blue ball all of us into thinking that he was hanging them up, only to do some weird non-retirement stunt that leaves us with way more questions than answers. I get it, people love him, but he has a fragile ego and can't admit that he is beyond finished. He went from the longest win streak to the longest losing streak in UFC history. I really think that this guy is spitting facts right here. Like, I think it's much less likely that Tony actually believes he has another title run in him like he claims, as much as his competitive nature just simply won't let him admit to himself that he simply can't hang with these guys anymore. I'm pretty sure that it's a bitter pill for any UFC fighter to admit, but ultimately Father Time is undefeated and there's no shame in losing to time. This guy says, don't know what the matchmakers were expecting putting him in against Chiesa. Ferguson versus Nick Diaz should have been the fight. And honestly, I don't really get it either, because originally this same fight card was supposed to have Nick Diaz fighting Vicente Luque on it, and fans everywhere were wondering why Tony Ferguson and Nick Diaz were both on this card, both fighting at 170, but not fighting each other. Now obviously Nick and Vicente were pulled from the card, but that doesn't change the fact that the matchmaking didn't make any damn sense. I will say this, although Tony should absolutely be forced to retire one way or another, the only fight that I would be willing to watch from Tony in the UFC at this point is a double retirement fight between Tony and Nick. Doesn't matter how the results go, win, lose, or draw, afterwards both guys retire from fighting. Alright, so obviously this whole Tony situation is a pretty complicated one, because he's made it more than clear that he doesn't care that fans want him to retire for his own health and well-being. Not only that, he's also made it clear that if he were to get cut from the UFC, then he would just go to the next best place to keep fighting. And that might make things even worse, because depending on where he would end up, they might let him get finished 10 times in a row just to milk him for all that it's worth. So at least to me, the only real chance that Tony truly has to hang up the gloves for good is if his family and loved ones intervene and beg for him to stop. And Jesus Christ, do I hope that his wife and kids and mom and dad and dog all sit this guy down and plead with him to just enjoy the remainder of his best years with them and not in the ring with fighters trying to knock him unconscious. At the end of the day, Tony needs the people that he will actually listen to step in and protect him from himself. Because until his loved ones intervene, then the calls from us fans and even Tony's bosses to retire are simply just going to be noise to him. Tony is such a wild man, and that's exactly what made him such a fan favorite so many years ago, but the days of him being El Cucuy are long gone at this point. And if Tony wants to enjoy a meaningful life after fighting surrounded by his family and loved ones, then his family and loved ones need to find a way to save him from his own ambition. Because if they can't talk some sense into him, I really feel like we're going to see Tony step into the ring again one way, shape, or another. Anyways, I'm gonna end the video here. Definitely let me know what you think of Tony Ferguson's record-setting 8-fight losing streak. Appreciate you guys for watching the video. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.